Hello everyone, this recording is from an event jointly organized by the French Center for Research on Contemporary China, the CEFC, and the School of Humanities and Social Science at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. It's the first in a series of events organized by the CEFC entitled The Humanities and Social Science Meets AI. This particular session was designed as a roundtable to share experiences, bringing together colleagues from different disciplines to reflect on how AI is affecting their everyday work, both as researchers and perhaps more importantly as teachers. Our speakers today are Jenny Hung, Assistant Professor of Philosophy in the Division of Humanities, Torben Pelzer, Assistant Professor of Digital Humanities and History, also in the Division of Humanities, and James Wong, Associate Professor of Social Science Education in the Division of Social Science. My name is Camille Salg. I am a researcher at the CEFC and Chief Editor of the scientific journal called China Perspectives. The recording begins just as Jenny Hung is about to respond to my first question, which is, when did AI enter your teaching or research practice? Was there a particular moment when you felt that something had really changed?
PhD is in nanophysics, and my second PhD is in philosophy. So actually, I started my investigation in AI before I start working on philosophy. So during my studies in physics, my PhD project, very briefly speaking, is to try to create nanomaterials, which are in a very small scale. Nano means 10 to the minus 9, so you cannot see it, but you can only see it in an electronic microscope. So my project basically is to devise nanomaterials to replace the CPU inside the computer. The basic idea is that the CPU nowadays is using electrons to transmit the data, and it is slower and it has resistance. So nanomaterials replacing the CPU, the idea is to reduce the resistance and to enhance the speed of transmission by using light as the medium of transmission of data. So that project actually already involved a lot about programming, because we have to devise the structure of the nanomaterials in order to produce that kind of materials for the replacement of CPU. So I have already been trained in programming, and I have done a lot of system inquiry. So it's like input-output designing, and that is actually a kind of thing very similar to the AI discussion. So it's like putting in your query, asking AI something, and then having some answer. We have that kind of practice in physics before AI is like popular among all these people who don't know anything about the mechanism of programming. So for me, it is like a linear, continuous process from programming, input-output discussion within the computer system, and then the so-called invention of AI and the bursting out of the AI era, which is like 5 years ago. And so for me, it is kind of a very smooth transition from physics to putting in AI programming, AI discussion, AI technologies within my discussion of philosophy. So my philosophy research is on Taoism, Buddhism, and philosophy of mind. And so within the philosophy of mind discussions, my interest is on the nature of consciousness. What kind of problem is that? So we have consciousness, and we say a computer does not have consciousness. We say a grass, a tree, mountain does not have consciousness. But in virtue of what we can say that we have consciousness, but these things do not have. So what is the definition of consciousness from which we can start the discussion? So I'm investigating the nature, the structure of our conscious experience, and how we can apply our definitions or our understanding of what consciousness is to other things, such that we can examine whether other things can have consciousness or not. So for example, you see a Martian from other planet, or you see a computer program, it is really sophisticated that you can talk to it and it feels like it has emotions. So how to define, how to categorize whether these things have consciousness? So these are actually my own research project within the philosophy of mind discussion. So I feel like it's a very smooth transition from the discussion of physics, using AI as a tool to investigate nanomaterials, to implanting my investigation of the nature of consciousness into the inquiry of whether AI has consciousness. So here nowadays, I have 3 projects on Buddhism and AI. The first one is exactly what I mentioned, which is whether AI can have consciousness from a Buddhist perspective. So this question is like answering, for example, how does Buddhism define consciousness? And then whether consciousness and sentience, Buddhism talks a lot about sentient beings, the rescued or elimination of suffering for sentient beings. So we care a lot about sentience. But how to define sentience? Is an AI system sentient? Should we implant value system into the AI system such that we are helping it to eliminate suffering? So should we consider it as something similar to ourselves? So this is one question I'm trying to work on these few years. And the second question is to try to use the wisdom in Buddhism to guide the direction of the development of AI. So nowadays, the development of AI is a bit chaotic, actually. The reason is that the use of AI is for those companies, especially the technological investigation companies. Their aim is to earn more money and to be faster than other companies. They don't really care much about the danger, the risk behind the technologies involved. And actually, so as a programmer, I know how to write programs, and we normally expect to understand the mechanism of how these answers are produced. So we are programmers, we understand why the system can produce such an answer and the limitation of the program. But nowadays, actually, the AI is out of control. So these programmers cannot answer the question of the mechanism behind why the AI can produce such an answer. So it is mystical. But these programmers don't care because they care about money. So even if they don't understand why the mechanism can produce such an answer and they cannot control what kind of answer is producing by the AI system, they still put all these things out in the market because they think, okay, since AI can produce these answers, let us just put it out. Give them a chance. They can win, right? So AI is in huge risk because of the unknown mechanism and the fast development nowadays. So as a philosopher who works on value system, who can produce or give advice to the programmers about how we can guide the direction of development of the value system to help control the AI development such that they won't become out of our control. I think Buddhist wisdom can help a lot. So I used some Buddhist wisdom to try to implant these ideas into some of the AI systems. For example, nowadays I'm trying to explain the one kind of AI called explainable AI. So explainable AI is one type of AI, which is, so when you use AI system, we input something, and then it produces an answer, but we don't understand why AI produces the answer, right? So explainable AI is one type of AI that tries to explain to you why the AI system produces that kind of answer to you. So one very simple example is that, for example, you put 200 applicants' profile for a job, and then you ask AI to provide you with the best candidate, for example, best 10 candidates. But how do you know whether the AI system has bias? How do you know what kind of criteria the AI has used in selecting the candidates? So there are a lot of black box mechanisms that you don't know. So explainable AI is one type of AI that helps you understand the mechanism behind, such that the programmers can switch the criteria and tell the AI not to do this and to do that. So I'm trying to use Buddhist wisdoms, which is to say, actually, you are a programmer. So the programmer is called a stakeholder according to the AI system. So actually, each stakeholder has their own value systems when they try to write the program for explainable AI. So it is a kind of linear data input system. For example, there are variables. So these are a little bit technical, but I'm just introducing the basic concept. So variables such as gender, race, qualification, age, etc. These variables, and each stakeholder is trying to input the linear consideration of these variables. And actually, this is one kind of perspective. So my suggestion is to say, okay, actually, from a Buddhist perspective, we can respect the different perspective of different stakeholders, because each of us have a very different background, culture, religious understanding of the world. So we have to respect each stakeholder's view, so there can be an integrated explainable AI. So I'm trying to devise that kind of structure of AI such that the bias produced by the AI system is minimized. So this is a kind of work I'm doing in my research to reduce the bias produced by AI, which is like an application of Buddhist wisdom or philosophy to guide the direction of AI such that the problems produced by AI is reduced. So these are two of the projects I've been working on. So I'm long-winded, sorry.
No, that was a good warm-up for everyone. And you said it was very smooth, but then it was out of control, which is kind of very interesting for us. There is a continuity or something very new, which is also a question we started to discuss with Torben in our exchange, because when we speak of AI, there are several kinds of AI. I don't know, Torben, if you want, maybe I leave it on you for this, and also how it happened in your life.
Sure. I mean, if you think about the history of so-called AI, you could start really early if you wanted to. You could start with Alan Turing in the 1950s. Even if you look at China, when was the first research society for AI formed? It's the early 1980s, which is much more in the past than you'd assume. But for most of us, I think the term AI only really came into existence in late 2022, I believe, with the release of ChatGPT, which was when the company OpenAI, they used this new architecture called Transformer, which is based on a paper of 2017, so also rather new. And they used this new technology to create a program that anthropomorphizes AI. So it made it look as if this statistical machine is somehow similar to a human person. It created the illusion, or it simulated something that we assume to be somehow similar to intelligence. And this really drew a lot of people into trying out this machine. And it, of course, led to huge investments, some say a huge bubble that might implode at any moment. But it also changed how we interact with computers, how we do research, and how we do teaching, for example. So this development is just 3.5 years old, which is a really short time frame if we think about it. And if you asked how it impacted me personally, then I think in my research at the beginning, I only used these chatbots in a way to have a quick alternative to Google. So for example, in my own research, I also do programming and coding, and I realized it's sometimes faster if I forget a command to ask the chatbot what was that command again than to Google and then go to platforms like Stack Overflow to try to find out the answer. It of course also led me to think less myself, I must admit, but it only really started to have more impact on me when these good so-called agentic agents were released, like Claude Code, which then I realized, why do I invest hundreds of hours to write a tool all by myself when I can co-design it with an AI agent, and it's just faster, more economic, as in it's more efficient. But then of course I realized, and there was a few years in my life where I only taught PhD students, So there was there were a few years of gap in between my teaching in Germany and when I commenced here in Hong Kong last year. And when I commenced teaching here in Hong Kong, I felt like I missed not just 2 years, but maybe 10 or 20 years, because the way that students were also suddenly using the agentic AI for their own purposes really had a huge change in how classrooms work, because a lot of classroom assignments no longer worked. A lot of teaching was offloaded from the human brain to the computer of the student. And this, of course, as you said, also led me to believe that we have lost a lot of control over how AI impacts our life, our research, and our teaching.
So, in your experience, it was quite helpful for the research part, which will we go back to, but it was quite a problem, let's say, for the teaching part, maybe.
It is very disruptive, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Very different experience. We all have, I guess, both experience, disruptive and interesting.
Yeah.
James, maybe you want to emphasize more about the education. I don't know, how does it come in your life?
Yeah, so I actually want to share more about teaching and learning, as my portfolio focuses on education and school administration for the undergraduate matters. Well, I do agree with the disruption points. Obviously, there were disruptions. Can be good, can be bad, can be positive, can be negative. But when I just recalled my memory, so when it actually came into my teaching practice, AI. So AI here, I'm just referring to generative AI. I didn't really have exposure to any other kinds of AI. I was trained as a political scientist and philosopher. I obviously didn't have experience in AI. But it all came to me at the end of about 2022. It was right after the COVID, or actually still during the COVID. I can't remember exactly. But when I was talking to a colleague in the Center for Education Innovation, so she told me, you've got to be prepared. There is a storm coming. You have to be very, very, very careful about this storm. Especially you're teaching humanities and social science subjects, you're asking students to write essays, right? So she was showing me that there was a tool that can generate sensible text in 10 seconds. Actually filled in 10 seconds. And if you insist on your students writing essays, submitting written assignment, there may be a problem. And I was still not very much aware of the problem back then. But when the university, in HKUST, if some of you were here in 2023, the spring semester, so the senior management actually called for a meeting to discuss how we should respond to this problem. And you actually noticed that there were different policies across different institutions in Hong Kong, global institutions across, around the world, and even within the university, across different departments, different programs, there were different sort of responses to the problem. I also actually got a chance to speak to some of the colleagues in different departments, and some of them actually said, we shouldn't tolerate this kind of tool, we should stop it. Just imagine how this would be if you allowed your children to use calculators when they were still very small, 3 years old, 4 years old. They're not going to do mathematics well. And then the interesting thing to me was the trend was very, very much like, even if you are very critical against generative AI, you still got to respond to it, Because there are so many people who were so obsessed with this sort of innovative tool. The moments that when I really can see the sort of the impact that I couldn't escape from thinking about it is when the university asked the instructors to make a decision. So back then, you can make your decision whether you are going to ban the usage, you're limiting the usage, or you are actually encouraging the usage of it. So that was the moment I got to think about whether I'm going to, what sort of attitude should I have towards AI. And this is particularly mind-blowing because it was after COVID, and during the COVID there were times when instructors were asked to, redesign your assessment. You could no longer lock your students in a room, close book exam, just do everything like in a traditional way. You got to sort of allow some sort of open book assessment, essay writing at home, and then suddenly you're telling me that, well, essay writing is no longer reliable assessment. And I was thinking whether I should switch back to closed book exam. Okay, and there was obviously a group of people, okay, trying to advocate for this. And there was another group of people, educators, okay, they would say, this is really the best moment to think about how you redesign the entire sort of teaching rather than focusing on outcome. You should focus on the process rather than focusing on 100% exam, like in many other universities, not in Hong Kong, but 100% or 50% exam. So you should actually think about how students achieve several milestones, okay, through the process. So all these questions, they're very, very scattered. I didn't really have answers to that. But if you're just asking me the question, disruption, yes, it did disrupt me. And I got to face it. And even if there were colleagues holding very, very, assertive position, okay, we shouldn't tolerate that. But eventually you got to respond to that. Well, even if you're going to ban it, you got to have a very, very good reason to explain to your students. And even if you can ban it for one assignment, could you actually ban the usage across different courses so the students may be able to use them in other courses anyway? So even if you can ban it in your course. So to answer your question, just very, very simple answer here would be, there was no way I can escape from the question. That was the particular moment.
23
spring
yes.
semester.
Yes. I'm going back to the question of teaching practice, which is central, but although I'm not participant, but I can't help and I want to add something about my experience, because now that I hear you, actually language learning and these connectionist models are related, but you can have connectionist model without a spoken output, right? And for me, the first experience was in 2016, when the machine, they beat the human players in Weiqi or Go, the Go game. And I am a huge fan of Go, and it was really a shock for me, because it was like, now the machine is stronger than human in what I thought was one of the most human thing. And I was like, I wrote a small essay. I was a postdoctoral student in mainland China at that time. I wrote a small essay on, okay, we have been trying for a long time to be like robots, writing lots of articles. And now we have the robots to do the articles. So what are we going to do? And now as an editor of China Perspective, right, it's very new, but we start to have articles. I think it started in the last few months. We started to have articles. We are clearly written by AI, although they are excellent articles, but written by AI. So it is disruptive in many other ways too. Thank you. So to go back to the teaching experience, concretely, what did change in your practice? I think we all agree that we can't escape it. So what did change? And one of the questions I often hear is that students have to learn new things, like what you mentioned about computation and calculation and this kind of thing. So, what did change in what students learn and how you teach them? I don't know if you want to continue on, James.
Yes, I can share some of my thoughts. So because of the storm and the reactions from different stakeholders, the university actually back then decided to reserve some resources for teachers, instructors to apply for some of the grants money. And I did try to apply, even though I knew not much about AI. And I was suggesting maybe we can try to leverage AI to enhance pedagogy. So for example, I have been using the case pedagogy for teaching public policy and ethics. So I was basically suggesting perhaps we can use AI to enhance this pedagogy. So how was I actually suggesting the project, or what did I actually do? Is instead of having the instructors prepare the cases. So in the past, I wrote the case, my research assistant, my teaching assistant wrote the case, but instead I delegated the task to students, because I saw that AI could be a useful tool for creating new things. So I wonder whether I could actually delegate a task to my student, and using this task to sort of educate them the process of creating things. Okay, so rather than trying to memorizing things, trying to produce papers, but why maybe we can actually say students could make use of the AI tool to fine-tune the storyline, to come up with different sort of tensions in a case study. Well, it actually worked for my class. Students actually spend less time worrying about how to write a complete case study, and I intentionally asked them, deliberately asked them to film videos rather than writing textual case studies, because textual things can be easily generated by AIs. So I said, you could prepare your storyline, brainstorm ideas using the AI tools, but you have to come up with your own video cases. But some of you asked me, yeah, you can actually use AI to generate videos as well, animation. It wasn't bad, because I still ask my students to present the cases, okay, in front of the classes, and they also got to do progress presentations, and by the end of the class, they were also requested to submit a behind-the-scenes video. So to reflect and record the entire process of thinking, the working. So to answer your question, I think I have been switching my attention from obviously just the output to the process. And one idea that I would like to share with you, I'm not really an expert, but I learned this idea from the CEI. So I know these colleagues there have been promoting the sort of concept of metacognition. So metacognition. So it's not just about thinking, but thinking about thinking. So when I first heard of this idea, I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about the philosophy of metacognition, obviously. But I was wondering how I could engage students to think about what they have been thinking. Okay, it is very important. And it is just not just about the output or the outcome. When you got the Gen AI to help you write an essay or to grade papers or come up with comments, you may not need to internalize the knowledge. You may not need to actually understand what it is. So it's very consistent with what we understand the sort of the technologies behind AI. But if you actually ask them to justify, their thoughts, or not justify, just to reflect on the thoughts, not necessarily justification. So they start to wonder, how I can actually step one step behind and think about the sort of the person. How did he or she actually come up with the things already available here? So I think the process was mainly about the reflection of the thinking. And it actually inspired me a lot, the idea, although I still need time to digest, or to extend what I can actually do based on this sort of metacognition idea, and in what ways we can actually educate people better, bearing in mind this sort of idea of metacognition. We can actually discuss this. I still want more ideas, actually. But in a word, I think basically asking people to reflect, asking people to think about the process would be more important than just be demanding a deliverable to be presented on the table.
Yeah,
that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah. Very interesting, and I think there are many points, but one of the points that I heard again and again is that maybe long written assignments are not so much. Are not really useful anymore. So one of the questions is the place of oral discussion, maybe as some new place in the classroom, and also the way to. Someone told me, you have to make them create things, which is very consistent with what you said, and this way they can go back to writing, because even when you do a video or something, you have to write to explain what is it, or if you do an exposition. So I think it's very interesting to see how these things come back maybe in a different way.
Sure.
I don't know, Torben, if you want to continue on this question of teaching.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you'd ask
me or probably many people which forms of assignment would die first, because they could be overtaken by the computer. You'd think they are instinctively assignments that are more mechanical, involving calculations maybe. I think not many people had anticipated that one of the first forms of assignment that died was the essay, which is a cornerstone of what in Germany we call the Humboldt ideal of education, of using your own mind to form your own arguments. And now the essay has basically died. I remember, like, for quite some years, I had to try to design assignments in a way that people couldn't cheat, that they had to use their own brain to respond to these assignments. I remember even before the advent of AI during COVID, when we designed online exams, I wouldn't write the quiz questions in actual script. I would, save them as images, so the students couldn't just Google, like copy paste the questions into Google. But of course, this is now ridiculous, because now the vision model can easily understand the image file just as they could the plain text. So then another example is that I do coding exercises in my class, and I then thought, well, in order to them actually do it themselves and not ask the language model, I will say you're only allowed to use commands which we have learned in class. And of course, the language model doesn't know what we have learned in class, so you could detect who uses language model. But now the context window of the language models have increased so much that the students just upload all my PowerPoints into the model, so the language model knows exactly what we did in class and what we haven't. So whatever you come up with, in such a fast time, it's not going to work out anymore. Now, an assignment that still worked out really well was I had the students. I contributed a lot of crayons, colorful crayons, and let them draw a nice map of the class content, and like a colorful mind map they had to draw manually. And that worked, but of course, young adults that just joined the university, they're not going to appreciate it if you give them colorful crayons and let them have to draw a picture. So, and of course, I'm sure that in a few years you will just have the language model create a crayon picture for you, and you just copy paste the crayon picture. So in the end, you run into issues no matter what you do. And I think this really leads you to reconsider, what also the university is for, right? Yes. And what we should do here. Because if now the education department, they offers the AI tool to design our course, in which we have students use the AI to do the assignments, and then the teachers, the lecturers use AI to grade the assignments, then what are we even doing here anymore? Then we can just have machines interact with one another, and we can just have a good time somewhere else.
Exactly.
So it really leads us
which
to...
would be nice in a way.
But it really leads us to pose some fundamental questions about what we try to achieve as humans even, and what leads us to fulfillment, and then also what leads us to visit a university, what kind of qualifications can we practice and improve at a university, and which are just no longer relevant as much as they were in the past, no matter if we like it or not.
Yeah, I actually have a small point to
Yeah.
add. Okay, so not only about grading, not only about essay writing, but I also came across the technology called the AI voiced lectures.
Yeah.
Okay, so you film the lecture videos like blended learning. Okay, so you no longer need to show your face. You no longer have to have the real lecturer, okay, in front of the camera recording your voice. You can just ask AI to sort of replicate your voice. You record a very, very short sort of script of your voice, okay, your tones, how you speak, and then you just type in the text, and you can mimic instantly, okay, an instructor, for the entire lecture. That was also a point that actually threatens a little bit. I consider that was a threatening moment to me, because I was thinking about my career. So how can I sustain, okay, what I'm doing in the classroom, and what do students actually expect me to do? What does the university expect me to do? If the technology can easily replicate how I speak, okay, in AI voiced lecture videos. So I just want to add this sort of small point on top of grading, essay writing, so on.
One of the
point I think is very crucial is that these questions, especially the essay, maybe not so much the one you just raised, James, but the essay, the question of the problem with the Humboldt style essay, Torben, is not new, right? You struggled with that before AI. I have this impression sometimes that AI just make us face problem what we already had, because it has been a long time that this kind of essay was kind of, it made complete sense in the 19th century, but there were problems with that form, I think, before AI, but now we can't escape those problems anymore, yes. Jenny, maybe about your teaching, what kind of class do you teach and how did AI impact your teaching?
Yes, so I'm a philosopher and I teach what am I, metaphysics, philosophy of mind, Taoism, Buddhism, introduction to philosophy, etc. So in my classes, I try to ask questions that trigger the thinking of the students instead of asking them to recite facts. I think that could escape the risk of AI, because if you're asked, so what does Descartes say? What is Descartes' philosophy? And you put this into the AI system, of course there can be a very long and detailed explanation of what Descartes has said, right? But if you ask the students, what do you think about Descartes' argument of the mind-body dualism? Is there a drawback, and how can you respond to this drawback? Or is it doomed to failure? So that involves a lot of thinking, and it is more than a factual question, which I think helps the students to go beyond the education system of the high schools in Hong Kong, which emphasizes a lot on memorizing things and learning more about facts. So I guess, I'm not I'm not working on education, but from my experience, I studied at a high school in Hong Kong, and I go through the HKCEE, which is an old system, which emphasizes a lot on memorizing facts. For example, biology has to memorize all this categorization of plants and trees and animals and the terms that you have to remember how to spell the words, etc. And chemistry, you have to remember table of the elements, etc. So I think the university education system can be more than that. So philosophy is not just to memorize what these philosophers say, but to try to think about and evaluate their philosophies, which can affect your value system and your understanding of ultimate reality and how you live in this world, find your position in the world, find your ultimate meaning of life, etc. Because we are philosophers, we're dealing with ultimate questions. For example, does God exist? And what is the meaning of life?
Sorry, Jenny, just to be concrete now, that's very interesting, but I think it's very important for me to understand. Did you ask this question to the students? Ask them to write it or to tell it? Because it makes a lot of difference with the AI.
Well, I think actually if you can ask the right question, if you can lead the students, trigger their thinking, any method is fine. So even if you ask them to write an essay, I don't think an AI can give you a very good answer if it is a question triggering, if it asks about your own personal values or your judgments of which philosopher is better. It requires your own thoughts. That is not replaceable by AI.
Really?
Yes. So I can clearly distinguish which essay is written by AI and which essay is not written by AI.
Okay.
So I still use
that's a different question, I think. Actually, I wanted to ask you, and then I tell you I won't ask you, but maybe we can come back to this question. Yeah. I think we all have this all the time. We are like, we have to distinguish.
Yeah.
So let's go to this question maybe. How do you have this problem of Does it appear in your work as a researcher or as a teacher or, for example, in my case, as an editor? And how do you deal with it, the criterion to distinguish both? Yeah. So maybe, Jenny, you can continue on this question if you...
Yeah, so if you probe the AI and ask a question about how to, ask AI about how to comment on Descartes' theory of the mind-body dualism and his arguments, the AI will respond to you by gathering all the information he can collect. Mm-hmm. And he said, okay, there is this guy who has this comment on Descartes' theory, and that guy has this comment on Descartes' theory, and then in summary, Descartes' theory is controversial. That would be an AI answer. But if you ask the question to really think about it, the answer would be very different. So he has his own answer. I think Descartes' system does not work because the premise 2 is problematic. This is his thought. How premise 2 is problematic, it is because he cannot provide sufficient information to demonstrate the correctness of this. And he gives other support. So it would narrow down the focus on a particular context, and he can investigate how he can support an argument. So this is philosophical training, which AI cannot replace. So I think philosophers nowadays are not replaceable by AI. We are training students to be philosophers, not to answer questions from summarizing all the facts or how people say about this question.
Yeah, I have some reaction, but first maybe Torben, if you want to say something.
Yeah, also to maybe respond to this idea, like in my experience, so I have asked students to rank different arguments, to give their own arguments or opinion, to even write essays that are about their own life. Just this week, and I got essays back which were written in the third person. So it was about, and then Peter did. You are Peter. Why do you? So it was, but the problem then is not that the AI did it. Wouldn't have been able to write this essay. It's just that some of my students were really bad at prompting the AI. In theory, I think all of these essay formats are doable by an AI, and that is an issue. Yes. So,
how do you deal with this?
Well, so far I haven't really dealt with it. I mean, the question is, so I would like to introduce maybe the concept of authorship into this discussion, because I realized that, for example, in disciplines that involve coding or programming, it is already acceptable to co-author your code within AI and still claim that this work, the paper itself, in the end is your own. While it appears that it is still very unacceptable to write the actual paper by AI, although it is acceptable to improve the grammar by AI. And now recently, the DFG, which is a funding organization in Germany, they have updated their recommendations. It is now acceptable for them, if you're a peer reviewer, to only write bulletin points yourself and then have an AI write the peer review for yourself. That is now acceptable.
It is acceptable.
Yes. And I think it will not take much time that it will become acceptable to write a paper using bulletin points and have the AI do all the language for you. And the reason that we are not there yet is because we connect more intimacy into our own words. But this is, in the end, a cultural artifact that might change. So the idea of authorship may also change.
Yeah, that's a very central problem for us as editors, because authorship is the whole point, right? So yeah, it is a very, very central problem for me too. James, do you have any insight on this question?
Any insights? Well, honestly, not too many, because I haven't been actively distinguishing between AI-generated work or student-authored work. Mainly because of the emphasis on the process already. Yeah, so my first point. The second point is when I was trying to look at the quality of work, okay, say for example reflections or essays, it's very interesting. I don't have any sort of very substantive sort of insights or guidelines to share, but well, as a teacher, okay, after many years of experience, you can really tell, okay, this essay is a little bit mechanical. Okay, so reflections, I asked you to write a reflection, but then you gave me all these sort of adjectives and vocabularies, okay, seeming to be official stuffs or letters, okay. It doesn't really match the tone or the vibe, okay, of the assignment. For the final essays or some of the open book assessment, I would just look at the overall quality, okay, of the arguments. So I always have the belief that if you are able to just come up with a wonderful essay using just generative AI tools, then you must be able to master this in a very, very tactful way. So say, for example, you got very, very excellent prompt engineering skills. You continue to ask questions. You're basically imagine yourself to be Socrates, okay, having dialogues non-stop, okay, with the machine. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but I was kind of looking at the sort of the quality of the essays, and most of them, if you believe, okay, these answers are actually AI generated, they tend to be also average, okay, in terms of quality. But I don't know. I really don't have any insights. Some of us may rely on generative AI detection tools, okay? So they generate a score, but this is never reliable. Once upon a time, I got to submit an assignment, okay, for a course that I am taking. So I'm a student. So 1, 2 actually said 100% AI, 1, 2 said 0% AI. I don't have any clue, okay? I simply don't have any clue. So I just have 2 more points to add. If we rely on the generative AI detection tools to sort of identify, okay, which essay is AI generated, I think it may not be fair to the students, okay, in the first place. The second point is, I think it is a bigger point for reflections, everybody. Should we focus our attention on detecting, okay, AI-generated or human-authored work? What I'm worrying is we are constantly turning our role as an educator into a manager in the classroom. So this is already what I am seeing because of the sort of the managerialism in institutions. Okay, it's not in a particular institution, but in many institutions, we have to fulfill all these sort of requirements, expectations, and then we're turning ourselves into managers. And then you know the SFQ system, right? So those students can actually rate you very badly, and then you have implications for your contract or whatever. So customer-oriented thinking has started to sort of being implanted, okay, in some of our classes. So we have been already turning ourselves into managers, okay, somehow. I don't want to turn further into a police, okay. So a manager is already not the ideal case. I just don't want to be police. So I have been telling my students, okay, I trust that you're not using AI. If you use generative AI, you have to declare it. There's a very, very much like an honor system. And then if you really use it, you have to shoulder your own consequences, okay? And you should prepare yourself to, I may actually ask you to defend your essay or defend your answer. It's a very, very fair system. And I don't have any sort of insights, but I think the bigger question is whether we should focus on distinguishing the sort of the AI-generated work or the human-authored work. Anyway, education is, I think the purpose is to enlighten the souls of the youngsters. If they do not treasure the opportunity, then it is really, it's really a difficult question whether I should police, okay, further on that. I don't really have any clue, so you can share your views. Should I become a police in a classroom? Okay, so that is a very, very important question, basically.
It is, and I can't help to again share my experience. I'm a terrible discussant because I want to talk. But we have exactly the same problem when editing the journal, right? Yeah. It's like we have a feeling that this is written by AI, this is written by human, and in our case, what gives us this feeling is that, I would say, the muddiness of the article. When everything is very clear and very clean, and nothing resists to your thoughts, that should be an AI. Yeah. When you actually went to do field works and everything is muddy and complicated and not the way you want them to be, and you can feel it when you read it. Yeah. But to go from this to criteria, like I can say, okay, I will reject this article and this will have very deep consequences for you. Like it's the same for students. It may be even worse for publishing articles, right? Because this is our job. Yeah, to have criteria, that's a step I cannot do because it's very difficult to do this step and to be sure what is really muddy or not. So I think it's still very difficult. And actually, I had a very wonderful discussion with ChatGPT on this. And his advice was to just judge the content and not the way it was made. But it's not possible, actually. It makes sense, but at some point when you really have a feeling that this is actually even the fieldwork was not done, it's all an invention from the, then it's really a problem, right? You can't publish that. I cannot. Yeah. So yeah, this is a really difficult question. We will come back. I'm sure everyone has insights about this. Maybe a last question. I insisted in the last two questions about teaching practice. It's more difficult, I think, to speak about research because everyone has his own, research field. But I was thinking of Luc Boltanski, who is a very important sociologist in France. Once he wrote that everything started to change or collapse, or I don't know, when they started to have personal computer long time ago. And he said, we used to work as a team, but suddenly you were all powerful. You didn't need anyone because you could do everything by yourself, especially the computation, the statistics, with your own PC. So you don't need, so he said at least the teamwork collapsed at that moment. So I wanted to ask you, in your research, does AI make you feel more lonely or more like part of a collective something? Does it empower you or does it make you maybe give you a sense of powerlessness? I don't know. Who wants to start with this question? Tricky one, I don't know. Torben, go ahead. I can see it.
Oh, really? I didn't see it. No, I think, we have to probably distinguish, right? I mean, the computer is a technology. It is not a medium per se. There are almost infinite possibilities of what you could do with a computer, and so with AI as well. And as such, I wouldn't say that you could say that, this technology necessarily leads to more isolation or more possibilities or more collaboration. I think that's really a case-by-case
But I think Boltanski didn't foresee it, At that time, he was like, super. But that's a kind of sociologist after point that, 20, 30 years ago, things started to change.
I mean, if you talk
like
about
an
change,
ideological point.
You could start much earlier, right? If there are these concepts of the global condition and the great acceleration, which begin 300 years ago with a steam engine at the railway, and people claim that everything sped up ever since. So the transport, the mobility, the communication, everything eased, simplified, and we have been on a trajectory where, if you look at some fringe philosophers like McKenna, they say even time itself accelerated at some point. Yes. So if you come from that direction and you look at a computer, of course, things accelerated even further than with the steam engine. But then it took all my life for the computer to arrive where it is now. So it still took several decades for the computer to be adopted by the mainstream, to be in every household, and to have such a role in our research and our daily life. And now with the AI, it only took 3.5 years. So you can see that things are still speeding up more and more, and we are still losing more and more control. So I wouldn't say it's about isolation or collaboration. It's really about the question of control and about human agency.
Okay, in your case, the question of collaboration or isolation, it was not the way you would put the problem. I get it. James, maybe, do you have any insight on this?
To be honest, I don't have a lot of time for research, in my position here. But I was trained as a political theorist, and I like thinking about political ideas. I like to actually think about how theories can be enriched, can be enhanced. So in the past, I tended to find people to have discussions, to join forums, seminars. If I got some sort of chaos, in my mind, I would like to find somebody to help me sort out, the chaos. Well, in that sense, I think the Gen AI tools may be giving me a more sort of excuse, okay, to isolate myself from the people. But as an introvert, okay, I think this can be a very, very tempting invitation, okay. You can actually just talk to the machine. But I also actually see this from another angle. So even before the arrival of ChatGPT, generative AI, or I would say the AI being so accessible, okay, by us. But even in the past, we can actually search online. Okay, we have search engines. We can actually read books myself in the library. We can also find all sort of resources and just continue with the chaos in your mind. So it is not really a big sort of change for me. Yeah. So in the past, I actually found, well, maybe talking to people was the only way to sort of resolve or sort out the chaos. I have an alternative now. But this sort of alternative is, well, I would say could be somehow similar to other kinds of technologies or even the huge amount of books in the library you can consult. But it is just becoming less costly, and then the temptation is, greater, okay, in terms of the extent. I didn't see a lot of change. If you're an introvert, you tend to think, okay, on your own.
The question of, I mean, just talking to people, I think it's a very sensitive question, and me too. When I'm thinking about what I'm researching, I'm thinking with ChatGPT and not anymore with colleagues. So what you said just makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah,
Jenny.
I think my answer is similar to James. So I read from the news that there are a lot of people getting too involved with ChatGPT, and they have emotional distress. They have problems with their attachments to GPT as a personality, and also maybe they would feel more isolated with other people. But for myself, I don't have any of these. Maybe because I don't really treat ChatGPT as a person. So I just use it as a tool, ask it to do things, and then after that I will shut them down. But I understand that some people are not like that. So they may feel a bit lonely in the first place, and then they want to communicate.
I was not thinking about, although it's a very sensitive point and very important in today's context, but of psychological kind of isolation, but really even as a tool. I mean, as the example of PC, I think, was telling in this regard. It's just a tool, but tools, sometimes you have to, like the 3 monks, they can't have water. This is the Chinese proverb. Because the tool they use, it's a 2-person tool. So if they are 3, they can't agree on how so the tool also connect people or disconnect them, right? So, but it's not relevant for your experience. You don't have a feeling that this tool connects you more or less, make you more or less powerful vis-a-vis the other researchers in your department, for example, or not really.
Not really.
Interesting. Okay, it was very refreshing to speak with actual people for a chat. I guess I have more questions, of course, but maybe it's a good time. We still have a lot of time, so it's a good time to open the discussion with. I'm sure everyone has this experience. You don't have to speak as an expert, but just to share your experience or to ask questions to our discussions or.